Welcome to the Square Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Richard. I am the lead for developer relations here at Square. Today, I'm joined by Dina Spitzer, who is an engineering manager at Square, has been with the company for coming up on 11 years now, has seen a lot of changes over time. Dina, I'd love for you to just give us a little bit about you. What did you do before you joined Square? And then let's talk a little bit about your journey as you've been here.
We can start back in 2010. So 2010, graduated with my degree in computer science, was really interested in the startup world in the Bay Area. And so kind of always knew that I wanted to go from Champaign, Illinois, glamorous Champaign, Illinois to San Francisco. And so I found a startup willing to relocate me out to the Bay Area, joined them, was super excited. And then I kind of saw firsthand how chaotic startups could be. And how for a while, every single year, I was shopping around for a new job, either because I was laid off or was about to get laid off, or the company was kind of flatlining. And so when I joined Square back in 2013, they were my very large, stable company. And I think we were at about 600 people when I joined. So still pretty small. Different world. Mm-hmm. And I've been on 3 teams at Square. First team was around building internal tooling for risk management. Second team was the team management team. And so I got the opportunity to work on the labor API, which is one of our public APIs on that team. And then I kind of got pulled into this world of APIs, and I'm there's a lot of improvements I want to make with our Square developer platform. And so after building the labor API, I moved over to the developer platform, to one of the infrastructure teams to help actually, improve the platform for internal developers to be able to build APIs at Square.
Yeah. And it's been, that's basically why I joined. I mean, I think it was Carl Perry, almost 7 years ago, and sort of convinced me with joining this team, because it was very much felt, at least the way that it was pitched was it's a little startup within a larger company. And so it was very exciting. Lots of new things being built, trying to figure out a lot of things, taking an existing product and how do we create APIs for it? And the team that you were a part of is very critical to making that possible. Building out the framework that was going to allow people to be able to expose the different parts of the Square point of sale system, to transform that into APIs and allow people to build on top of it. In that time, so you joined as a software engineer, and then you kind of evolved over time to being sort of a lead within your team, becoming an expert in what it is that you were working on. And then more recently, in the past couple of years, you transitioned to an engineering manager. So I'd love to, chat a little bit more what, that evolution has been, and how, at what point felt this felt more of the same, and then the point where it goes, okay, this is totally different.
Yeah, sure. Great question. So I joined the team that I'm currently managing, I think 5 or 6 years ago, as an IC, individual contributor, software engineer. Just joined wanting to make the world a better place. And then I had a vision, had a drive, really studied our platform from the ground up. And I guess I can't say specifics about our internal tooling or internal infrastructure. Yeah. But let's see. Identified some improvements I wanted to make to our internal architecture, internal infrastructure, got the team on board, and we really started building in that direction. And then a little over 2 years ago, my manager departed the company and literally overnight asked hey, do you want my job? You have 24 hours to decide.
Oh my gosh.
And I'd always been it was kind of crazy. And I had just had a baby too. I'd been back for 2 months after coming back from maternity leave. And I'm still catching up. And I'm okay, let's do this. Let's just try out this whole engineering manager thing. Never look back. And it's been an adventure. Every day is a different adventure. It's a fun job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that is, I similarly had gone through that transition from being an IC to being a manager. Granted, I know that I have had a very different role because I don't do traditional software engineering. It's, a blend of things. But one thing that like really stuck with me in that transition of like IC to like EM or management is I remember something that Carl Perry said to me before he had left, when I was like really thinking about whether or not like go into management, is the difference between leadership and management. And that, it's very easy for us to like start to believe that like in order to be a leader, you need to be a manager. And I think like it's a very like common misconception that just because somebody's a manager doesn't necessarily mean that they're a leader. And it's actually possible to be a leader while being an IC. I think that's like why we've seen the growth of like the tech lead as a job that has come up, is that when you become an expert, or you just, you inspire others, you help others, you mentor others, but you're not necessarily a manager. I'm just kind of like curious, like, how you've seen this difference when you've gone from like being an IC to being an EM, and like, what you sort of see is that difference between like leadership and management.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely felt more of a leader as a tech lead than as an EM.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a tech lead is very much like, here's my technical vision, let's get the team on board. And it's very much like individual leader, let's go. But also let's take the team with us. While management, it was definitely like a shift in mindset, I would say, because with management, it's empowering others to lead and only really stepping in and using your voice as a leader when there are gaps and when it's needed. But ideally, you manage yourself out of a job. Ideally, you empower those and delegate and have others on the team step up and really, I guess, like use their own voice. Yeah, empower them to become leaders. And often, like in one-on-ones, those people will express they want to step into that leadership role or want to do that tech lead role. And so then you start finding work to actually enable them to step into that leadership role. So you're very much supporting and empowering people to lead rather than being like, I'm the leader, here's my voice, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
It's much more of a supportive role.
Yeah, I think that you put that really well, because like one thing that I found particularly different about going from like IC, at least like in the like initial phase, like I know that like there's this like phase where some people will kind of like become a manager, but then like still have IC responsibilities. So you're doing that like player coach type thing. But the thing that you touched on there that I think is like really important to like learn how to do is the delegation piece. And I found that to be particularly challenging at first, because I think as an IC, you get so used to being able to just like take on the work and complete it, or like, figure out how it should be solved. And I think like when the part where I felt the most growth in going into management was like being able to actually hand something that I know that I could do really well, but like giving it to somebody else to be like, no, like I want them to do it because they're going to grow more as an individual when they do it. And I'm here to be that resource. And so, yeah, I just love it, like the way that you sort of talk about like the delegation piece, but it just felt like that's like a thing that you don't really do as an IC. Like you're not really delegating things. You're just kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to go solve this, or I'm going to go talk to my manager and they're going to help me unblock me. One other thing I was just curious about, like in the mindset shift from, IC work to EM work, I'm curious, like how has your idea of like what success in your role has changed? Because, as an IC, it's like, hey, I completed this work, or I created this design and, implemented this or launched this product feature. But like, that's not a whole, like, you're trying to do like enable a whole team of people doing this, but like, you're not actually the one doing it. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about like how that mindset shift has changed in terms of like what you think of as success.
Yeah, I would say that there are two components. There's like the internal management and then the external management, and you have to think about both. And you can be successful or not successful in either of those areas. So, for example, internal management, it is successful when I empower someone to step into the leadership role and they step into that role and I can reward them, I can promote them based on that. I would say that's more like, leadership and internal management, and that's a success story. External management success story would be like, we redirected and pivoted to align the team with the direction of the company. And we're now able to help the company hit a specific milestone and working with product and so on. So it's how do we fit into the bigger picture? And both are very different and very different skill sets, and both kind of invisible work as well.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, like, one thing is like, because of this, like this shift, it's like, I don't know how often you might feel this way, where like you can end up having like a day where like, here's the things that I wanted to accomplish today. And by the end of the day, you might end up just going like, I have no idea what I did. You suddenly just jump into meetings, or you're addressing like firefighting, and you look back and you go, I feel like I didn't do absolutely anything. But you did something, but it's like, I don't know, it's like, it feels disconnected at times, because you're trying to just sort of like unblock things for people. And like, once it's unblocked, you're not seeing the result of it. You're just seeing like, okay, somebody has an answer, they can move forward. And I'm going to see the result of this a week or two from now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And a skill set that I've had to learn is like living vicariously through others' accomplishments. So if somebody on my team was able to accomplish something because I unblocked them, because I delegated the right work, I had the right conversations to set them up for success and give them that work, it's their project, they're running with it, and they succeeded. But I'm like, yes, I played a role in that. And you kind of just have to like take those wins, where when your team succeeds and when the individuals on your team succeed, you're succeeding.
No, I think that's very well put. It's like, you no longer try to like look at like, it's like you have to redefine your personal success through your team's success. And like, so like on those like days or weeks where you feel like I didn't do anything, but like all of a sudden you see all the updates from your team on like, hey, look, we shipped like these 3-5 things, and look at what kind of impact they're having. And you're like, wow, I'm like so proud of my team. Like, I can't believe that they're able to do all this stuff. So yeah, I definitely say like that's probably one of like the more rewarding parts in trying to make that shift. One thing I want to like go back to a little bit is, and this is like probably more true now that you're like the engineering manager on the team. Like, so, when first starting on the team that was building out like the frameworks for our developer platform, we were having like a big shift in terms of like how we were actually building our APIs. Like, we used to have it like all built by like one team trying to build it into all these different services. And we realized like, this isn't scalable. And so we then shifted over to this like decentralized way of like, hey, we're going to build out like a framework, and we're going to give this to a bunch of teams and say, hey, you're going to like use this in order to go and build out those services. I recall that like that period of time was a little bit rough, because, there was a lot of like, heavy on call, firefighting type stuff. I'm kind of interested in like how that has changed for the team over time, and like sort of how do you help build that resiliency for a team to like be able to, work through the constant firefighting and now be in the, like what, is a much more stable place.
Yeah, great questions. I think the biggest thing that we did early on, I'm trying to think back, but the first year joining the team was actually dig into what are we getting paged for? Why are we waking up at night? We actually found that the majority of our pages were not real. They weren't actionable. I mean, our monitors and detectors were just a little skewed. They were just a little off, or they were detecting things that weren't actually real issues. And so we put a lot of effort into actually reducing the page volume and the noise around that. And then we did a lot of work around what are the noisy parts and how can we extract them out. We did that for logging. Yeah, I'm trying to recall because it was like 5 or 6 years ago. But we did a lot of work up front to basically figure out why are we waking up in the middle of the night and how can we get that page volume down. And after I would say like a quarter or two of working on that, it was much more balanced on the team. Like it was a much, much nicer team to join, and a team where you're not regularly woken up in the middle of the night. And it was great. And then we could kind of continue with our vision after that. But there were fires when I joined. Yeah. Lots of fires.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, it was a very interesting time. But I mean, I think that the work to like sort of actually, and I think it's something that can get overlooked quite easily sometimes, is how many false positives are we really getting here? Like, and let's actually like block time to like go back and see like, are we trekking the right signals? Is there anything that we're actually fixing here, or are we just creating like a lot of noise? Because I mean, nobody wants to be on like a chaotic on-call rotation.
No, and also another thing I'm recalling that we did was we used to all just swarm. We would like stop our project work and swarm on like on-call issues. And that means that your project work doesn't really move forward. So there were just a lot of process changes that we made very early on. And we were like, primary on-call, primarily digs into the issue. They can leverage secondary on-call. If they really need to, they can pull in someone else from the team. But having that like separation of concerns on the team really helped us to actually continue pushing our product work forward while also fighting fires.
Yeah. No, I mean, like it's crucial because it's too easy, especially like, when you're, in that firefighting mode to just like be dropping everything and being like, oh, we have to go put this out. And then, you're in this like context switching and trying to go pick up the old work. And it's much harder to move things forward. So one thing I wanted to ask about is like, so, as you've now been in the EM role for a while, how is it that you have approached, or like, I mean, this is going to feel like a weird question, but what is it that you've noticed or like look for in like some people who like are starting to like evolve into like that tech lead role, and like how do you like think about like, fostering that, or like trying to like fan the flames on that interest?
Yeah, I've definitely worked with a couple people on my team who've expressed they want more leadership responsibilities. They wanted to step into that role. The biggest thing is identifying a project that they can actually like use to step into that leadership role, or sometimes asking them to identify a project and kind of working with them and product to figure out what that, really senior project is going to be. And sometimes there is no project for a little bit. And until you identify that project, you coach them and mentor them on leadership traits within their given work. So that when it comes time to actually take on that really senior project, like they're ready, they're there. But I also really like the primary and secondary DRI model. So let's say that somebody really wants to step into the tech lead role. I have them be the primary DRI, and then I have someone a little bit more senior than them be secondary DRI to provide like coaching and mentorship as we go. And I found that that's really effective, so that they have that support when they need it. But really, they're the ones, leading the conversations and leading the project.
Oh, that's really great. Cause like, and it's so funny to hear that, because like on our API design team that I lead, we actually kind of followed organically like a very similar route that like, when we have somebody that's going to be pairing up with a team that's, working through an API design, we always have like a primary and a secondary, and we kind of like treat it like, one person is like gonna kind of run it, and then you have somebody as backup. Part of that is like to handle like, when somebody's like has to go on leave or something, that somebody's like able to immediately like pick up on it. But we found that when like onboarding people into that process, it was like super valuable to have the more senior, more knowledgeable person as a secondary. So it feels like there's a safety net. So like when you get to that unknown, uneasy area, you have somebody you can consult with on the side who can be like, oh, like here's the things that you should like think about. So it's great to hear that, great minds think alike in terms of these approaches.
Yeah, it's an effective model. And it's also really awesome to see that like less senior engineer who's assigned as primary DRI. It's really awesome just to like see them grow and improve and receive that mentorship and really take that mentorship and lead. It's one of my favorite things about management, to be honest, just like seeing that growth of everyone on your team and enabling that.
Yeah. As you sort of like foster like growth for individuals, I had this kind of conversation with one of the mics that works here, and there was an interesting thing that he talked about when trying to like help somebody like level up, like say like even in just like their software skills is, and I'm just wondering how much this might ring true for you, that when somebody's going like diving into like an engineering design or trying to interpret like a product requirements document, that how often have you found like to like rather than giving somebody the answer, just giving them another question or like another direction to have them investigate in order for them to like go learn it on their own? Because I think it's very tempting to just be like, oh, I know the answer to this. Like you should go talk to this person, do this thing and do this. And you kind of just go, well, why do you think that's happening? I mean, do you find like that happens fairly often, or what are your sort of like different tools for like fostering that type of engineering growth?
Definitely that. Another tool that I use is if there's someone a little more quiet on my team, but I know they have the answer, I'll be like, oh, person A, like, what do you think about this? And I know they have the answer. But I know that they don't really always feel safe or comfortable expressing in like a big group setting. And so redirecting conversations to get focus on people who otherwise wouldn't speak out is a tool that I really like to use.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. I mean, just like, I think that it's an interesting thing too, because like, you learn the ways in which you can do that, because, for some, it might feel like being put on the spot, but like when you know that like, oh, this person totally knows the answer to this, I'm just trying to give them that moment to like shine and be like, hey, like, go ahead and like tell us all so that, they can basically express that. I think another one that, I've used, I don't know if you've used it as well, as like whenever somebody on the team like actually has like done something, and like you're trying to like sort of like share it with others, I always like am very egregious about just giving credit to people all the time. I'd much rather say that, Anthony on my team did this, Jordan on my team did that. Like, and part of it is to like direct people to be like, hey, when you want an answer on this stuff, you actually don't have to come to me. You can go to them and they'll give you the answer for that. But I felt like it just kind of like helps boost the confidence of like, these aren't me, these aren't my ideas, this is my team. I'm just here to empower them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And something that I'm doing right now is some of the more like vocal tech leads on the team. I'm actually coaching them to try and play that role. I'm like, you've had your time in the spotlight. You're a very powerful technical leader. Let's now shift your focus to actually empower, these other people to actually step up, because there's only so much air in a room. There's only so many voices that can be heard. And so it's interesting that I've learned to do that through management. And I'm also currently having conversations with some of the more vocal people on the team to coach them to actually empower their peers as well. Yeah, like something I'm doing right now is just coaching the more senior technical voices on the team to actually like shift and empower other people on the team, and to kind of shift the spotlight over from them to some of their peers, which is a different kind of leadership for them.
Yeah. Well, and like to harken back to something that you actually said previously, like where that's kind of like teaching that little step of like going into an engineering manager is like when your work as an EM becomes more invisible. And like, so the more senior, the more of a voice that you end up having, you have to like learn to be like more reserved, more careful with it, because sometimes it's like, people, you say something and people are like, okay, like that's what we're going to go do. And you're like, well, that's not what we want to happen. But also it's like you allow other people that space to grow. And so like when it's dominated by like the more senior people, suddenly you can develop this culture of like, oh, well, there's no mentoring, there's no, advanced projects to work on. And like the more you coach those more senior people to be like, sit in the background, let other people discuss, and only kind of dive in when it feels like, hey, it looks like we're veering off, or like, hey, actually, I think this might help a little bit more. So I think that's wonderful in terms of like trying to like, really balance the seniority in your team in that way.
Yeah. And honestly, one of the best things I ever did for my team was had a kid 3 years ago, because I left the tech lead and I came back and there were all these leaders in my, absence. And there was so much room for the team to grow in my absence too. And so timing worked out.
That's like, it's really funny that you say that, because I think like, you just immediately gave me a flashback of like when I joined the API design group, was because my manager went on paternity leave and was gone, and I had to sort of like cover for them and lead this other group, or at least participate in this group. I wasn't leading at the time. And that I would admit as an IC, it was like, this is wild. Like for like 3 or 4 months of just like, I have to answer all these questions. I'm completely out of my comfort zone. But I mean, in the end, it's like, it's really good growth. It's in all honesty, that's, I think, what convinced me to actually, that I wanted to do more management type stuff, was being able to be thrust into that, try it in this place where I don't feel like I'm completely committed to this. There is a timeline where I don't have to do it anymore. And so it's like great that there's like these ways to sort of inadvertently create that space, and you come back and you find out like, hey, the team didn't fall apart without me. In fact, they're stronger and better than they were previously.
100%. Yeah. And on that note, I'm actually starting maternity leave for baby number 2 next week. And
wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And my tech lead for my team is actually going to be covering for me in my absence. And I think this is just an excellent opportunity for him to step into the management role and to really learn and grow in that area.
How have you sort of approached like preparing somebody? It can be this one person in particular, but like, it's sort of thinking like, it's not often we get these opportunities and they be like, how do I explain to somebody else to do what I do? Because most of the time you just start doing it and like you build your own process and mentality and framework. But then it's in this moment you have to go like, wait, now I actually have to like codify this to some extent. How has that been, and like, how have you sort of approached it?
Yeah, great question. So I literally started like a brain dump doc 2 months ago. And anytime I was like asked to like implement some sort of process or do some sort of process or think about some sort of question, I just put it in the doc. Mm-hmm. And then last week, I actually cleaned up the doc. I was like, okay, this is my wild, random brain dump. Let me actually clean up the doc and then have like a really long conversation with this person. So I can give you some examples of things that I put in the doc. So the easy stuff is like, hey, every quarter, do something with this spreadsheet. It's like the very standard process mm-hmm. things that, managers have to do. Okay, fine. That's the easy stuff. And then there's the other thing where it's like, here are the ongoing conversations that I'm having with these people and these teams. This is the status mm-hmm. of each of those conversations. And I want you to continue these conversations. And then another category of items that made into that doc was more taking a step back and like very high level questions, like things that I'm thinking about with my team in that moment. So it's, how does my team align with the goals of the company right now? Mm-hmm. How is this person going to get promoted? How, like, just very like high level questions that I'm constantly trying to get data points for and constantly thinking about. Mm-hmm. So it went from very do these steps and do these process things to very high level, what are questions that we should really be thinking about? Mm-hmm. And I really trust the person that is covering for me. I think it's just a slight shift in his mindset. But I think I'm leaving my team in really good hands.
Yeah. It's interesting, like in that like reflection where like, there's like the bullet, like the task list of like, the priority list that we build of like, oh yeah, here's the things you got to do on like this particular cadence. But then like, it's also great that you're creating like those more like abstract, like here's like your North Star things, make sure that you're, following these things. And like when you're feeling like lost or confused or something out of the ordinary happens, as long as you're kind of like directing towards these things, like you're going to be going in the right way. And, but I mean, like, these are all things that you sort of built into your team over time anyways, like that this is what's important. This, if it's not in this realm of things, it's not that important. Don't worry about it. And that's, I think, how you end up building like a team that you can trust a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Well, I think that's probably a place where we can say like that's it for today. I want to thank you for joining us here on the podcast and helping us in getting like the very first episode done. And I think that it was a great conversation talking about the evolution of going from IC to EM and how do you foster growth and trust and seeing others become better software engineers.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your very like insightful questions. This is a lot of fun.
Great.